When we're young, we have an amazing, positive outlook about how great life is going to be, but somewhere along the line, we forget to dream and end up settling. Join Up Dots features amazing people who refuse to give up and chose to go after their dreams. This is your blueprint for greatness. So here's your host, live from the back of his garden in the UK, David Ralph.
Yes, hello there. It's your lovable host coming once more on the daily show, which is Join Up Dots. Yes, 7 days a week I will be there helping you, supporting you, protecting you like Batman. So send a big dot up into the sky. I will see it and I will be there. Now, today's guest is a go-to resource if you're in need of strategic information to grow your business using Facebook ads. Living in San Diego with his lovely wife, Amy Clover, he's dominated the industry with a back-to-basics, no fuss, and extremely pleasant way of operating within this area of social media. You'll be hard-placed to find anyone who has a bad word to say about this guy. And believe me, I've tried. Moving to LA over 9 years ago without a job, a home to live in, or even many friends to call on, he knew that he had the hustle muscle to make a success of his dream. And what was that dream? He wanted to leave a six-figure job in online corporate advertising that had been his life since 2000 and bring the skills that he'd developed into the small business world. He wanted to be the guy that could provide the small guys with the knowledge, skill, and insider secrets that could help them take on the huge advertising budgets that corporate America had at their disposal and win. Win big and win fairly. So why did he take such a risk when others would have played safe and stayed where they were until retirement? And why did he decide that the West Coast was the only place to be? Well, actually, no, that's a stupid question to ask. Sun, sand, and whatever else you want, all in one place, duh. And what is it like being friends with the movers and shakers of the internet? Well, let's find out as we bring onto the show to start joining up dots of his life, the one and only Mr. Rick Mulready. How are you, sir?
What's up, David? How are you doing?
I am rocking and rolling this afternoon. You are the sixth interview I've done back to back, and I'm just starting to feel that I'm getting the hang of it.
Oh, okay. Okay, nice. Are you really in your backyard in the garden?
Yeah, I am. I'm right at the back. Yes, just by the swing, just to give you sort of geographic location, and by the side of the trampoline.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that's where my office is, and I broadcast to the world from the back. Not quite as glamorous as San Diego, where obviously you live. Did you actually, because I listen to a lot of podcasts, you know, you've got a podcast, and do you feel that being in San Diego, you are center of the internet? Because it kind of seems that way. It's like if you guys go off on holiday, the internet shuts down until you come back. Do you kind of feel that?
It's one of those places. It's a really cool place here. And as you know, and I know that you're referring to, there's a bunch of us here who have these online businesses and are doing the podcast and so forth here in San Diego. Off the top of my head, I can probably name 10 to 15 people who are, rather quote unquote well-known online. So yes, it is one of those centers of the internet marketing universe. I like to think it's a really cool place, and one of the reasons why we moved down here from LA 6 months ago was these guys are all our friends, so we like to surround ourselves with people who are doing things that that they're doing things that we want to be doing, and surrounding ourselves with our friends. So that's a big reason why we moved down here, and it's a great place here in San Diego.
Do you ever just slip something in John Lee Dumas's drink or something just to see if a black hole occurs in the internet?
I have not done that. John's a good friend. I just saw him on Saturday, but he's hustling just like everybody else here. So I don't. I'm not going to be slipping anything in his drinks though.
That's a key word, though, isn't it? Hustle. Now, all you guys out there, you are successful, and you have got a profile. You've got a profile on the online world. If I said to somebody sort of, walking down the street, have you heard of Pat Flynn? They wouldn't have know him. But certainly, he's the name that comes up more often than not on the shows. But away from the talent, away from the profile that you've all got, it is really a case of hustle, isn't it?
Oh, sure. Sure. And that's one of those traits that is very common among, our friends here and the people that live here in San Diego, not just San Diego, but just, everybody who's wherever they are. I mean, you're across the pond. So wherever you are, there's a common trait among these people who are, successful online. And it is that hustle. It's that, willing to I'm rereading a book right now, and it brought something up that is really relevant to what we're talking about here. It's, we're working on things, we're working really hard, working several hours a day, but yet it doesn't feel like work because we love what we're doing so much. We're helping people out, we're making a difference for people. And, and because of that, we're able to create an income out of that. And, that hustle is, yeah, for sure. It's hard. It's a lot of long hours, and, that sort of the days running together. You're not really sure whether it's a Tuesday or a Sunday, but that's, I'm very, personally, I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for the fact that, I can work 12, 14, 16-hour days and not have it feel like a huge grind that I used to feel in the corporate world. So yeah, hustle is a huge part of it, but at the same time, we really enjoy what we're doing, and so it makes it that much easier.
Our mutual friend, and I say mutual, I'm doing like little quotey rabbit ears here, Mr. Michael O'Neill, who's got the Solopreneur Hour, who was the inspiration for me getting on the mic and doing the show. He had a quote a little while ago, and when I heard it, because I've never been an entrepreneur until this, and when I quit my corporate job, I really had a naive view of being able to choose my own hours and sit down the pub because it's sunny. And actually, I'm doing a lot more work now than I was beforehand. The other side of the coin is I love it. I really love it. And he had a quote when he said, an entrepreneur is somebody who will work 100 hours per week because he won't work 40 hours per week for someone else. And that's about it, isn't it? Yeah,
exactly. It really is. I mean, I love that you just said that you are working more now, but you absolutely love it. And, that's really the reason why I left the corporate world. And we can certainly get into that if you want, but I was not living a lifestyle that was true to who I am and the type of life that I want to live. And yes, even though I'm working way more now than I was, 4 years ago in the corporate world, I'm so much happier because I'm able to, create my own lifestyle and, work as many or as little hours as I want. And it's definitely more on the many side, but I'm able to, right before we started talking, I'd gotten back from the gym, so I'm able to go to the gym late in the morning, where most people are in the office, but I've created that for myself. But again, I was up at 6 o'clock this morning and, on the computer at, 6:30 or so. So it's just a matter of, creating that sort of lifestyle that is right for you, hustling like we were talking about. And, in the number of hours, again, it is a whole lot better when you really enjoy what you're doing. So yeah, I love that quote from Michael.
The hustle muscle, have you always had it? If we went back in time to young Rick, who I believe was New Hampshire born.
Yes, very good.
Were you somebody who was always out there mowing lawns and washing cars and trying to earn a buck? Did you always have that in you?
I actually did, but I have to, this is a really good question because it wasn't necessarily because of me. I was friends with this kid who I'm happy to say I'm friends with still all these years later, but growing up, I was friends with this kid in the neighborhood, and he was my best friend growing up. He was a big influence on. We used to run magic shows for the neighborhood kids. We used to do haunted houses around Halloween time. We used to just kind of sell things, whatever we found. So we had that little entrepreneurial spirit, and then after sort of we went to different grade schools. So we kind of went apart a little bit, and then we were at the same high school and then college. So as we get older, obviously that our lives split, and I didn't really have that as much. And he went on to start businesses and so forth, and be very successful in the entrepreneurial corporate world. And it's a really good question because that did go away for me, but then it came back later in my life. And, but with that said, though, for me, there was always that underlying, I didn't like to take orders from people. I didn't like I didn't like having to do something just because someone told me to do it. And I'm not positive really where that came from, but that certainly plays a huge part in my journey as an entrepreneur and coming back to it sort of, if you will, later on in my life. So yeah, I really don't, I mean, it was there early on, but I don't necessarily take credit for it, if you will, if that makes sense. I sort of was doing it because of the relationship I had with my friend at the time. But I guess, there was something there all along, and it just sort of showed up later in my life.
Because we're kindred spirits, actually, because I've always been told that I've got an attitude problem to authority. And I always used to say, no, I haven't. It's only when I don't respect that authority. That's where my problem is. And I used to be in corporate land in London, and in those days, when I first went there, you could become quite a high-ranked manager just because you'd been in the job for a long time. It really was a job for life. And you could go in there at 16, and some of the guys, when I first went in there, they were like, ready for retirement. And they were rubbish managers. They'd just been there 40 years. And even as a 16-year-old walking in there, it always stuck in my throat that somebody was telling me to do something that A, they couldn't do themselves, and B, I couldn't see the worth in it. But if somebody told me something that I could see the worth in it, then my attitude to authority was right up there. I would, jump through hoops for them. Yeah. But it was that kind of issue. Would you be the same on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, because you said when there's worth in it, that totally changes how you look at it. And when you first said that, that sort of, I perked up and said, yes, that's exactly what it is, because coming in that corporate world and having to answer to, my bosses and so on, that it's when that what they were telling you, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, why are we doing this? This makes no sense. There's no worth and there's no value in what you're telling me to do. And that's when I have the problem. And when we're able to find that person who actually is telling you to do something that is of value, is of worth, then it changes my perspective.
I used to get into a lot of trouble, Rick, when they would give me a job to do, and I would look at it, and they'd always tell you how long the job was going to take you, which was always a bizarre thing. Right, here's the paperwork. That's going to take you 8 hours, so you're going to have your lunch and you'll be busy for the rest of the day. And I used to look at it, and I used to think, this is a stupid way of doing this. Why don't I do it this way? And I used to get it done really quickly. Ultimately, then I would get into trouble for finding the quick route. Now, I thought it was, a brainwave. And
isn't that funny?
Yeah, it should be applauded. Then many years later, I was reading Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, and he got into the same issues because he would find the quick route to do something and then basically take the rest of the day off. And he was saying, why should I justify my hours to do a job when you're paying me for the job and you're not paying me for the hours? And it was a complete mindset. And I think that is when my entrepreneurial head switched on. And before then, I'd never had that hustle muscle, but I suddenly thought to myself, as you were saying, why the hell can't I go to the gym in the afternoon because it's right for me to go to the gym? Or why can't I work at 3 o'clock in the morning because I'm a night owl and I don't like getting up and being in the office by 8 o'clock in the morning? It seems that the whole corporate world is holding on to something which the people within it are ready to break free. And it's almost it's like a bubble that's being pushed out. And 5 years, 10 years down the line or something, it's going to burst. That's my view anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree, David. It's like, as I look back now and I think, okay, well, we used to have, the hours in the job that I was working was quote unquote 9 to 6. And, that is certainly, there's hours before, hours after. However, if you think about that, it's like, okay, 9 hours and there's going to be an hour or so lunch break there. So let's just say 8 hours. Well, I look back on it now and you look at the productivity I have now versus in the corporate world of knowing that I have to be there a certain amount of time. Now, granted, I was in the sales, I was selling online advertising. So I was in and out of the office meeting with clients and so on. But, as I look back on it now and I think, all right, there was 8 hours in the day. I had to be there. I had to be working for my job. And looking at it now and thinking about productivity, I love learning about productivity, and I'm still working on it after these few years that I've been on my own here and had my own business, and still trying to find those sweet spots, if you will, of maximum productivity during the day. I'm definitely a morning person. As soon as I hit the evening, I'm the opposite of we talked about Pat Flynn earlier. Pat's a night person. He doesn't get going until about 10 o'clock at night. I'm, my brain's dead by that point. And so it's definitely a journey that's continuing to find where that productivity is the most. But when I look back and say, okay, those 8 hours there, I look back, I think about it how it is right now. And, they say that you're most productive for, well, I hear different things, but you're most productive for like 40 minutes, and then you start to, your brain starts to waver, so it's a good time to take a break and then come back to it. Well, the corporate world doesn't teach you that. They're expecting you to work, from 9 until, let's just say 12, and then 1 to 5 or 6. And that is what, and that's what your schedule is, and that's what you need to be doing. And if you're taking a break during that time, or because of productivity is falling, to your point, what you said before, David, that you're finding a different way to do something a lot quicker, it's not looked upon favorably. So it's such an interesting paradigm to look at, as far as the hours worked now as an entrepreneur and having my own business, as opposed to the corporate world. It's very funny. It's very funny to me.
I think we need to take over the world, Rick. Do you know?
We do.
I think
you're doing it right now at this show.
Oh, I'm doing my bit from this side of the pond, but you've got the movers and shakers, haven't you? You've got them in your pocket, all of them. Your first names, aren't you? With the Flynns and the Dumases and all those kind of things. Does it?
It's pretty cool.
I don't want to keep on sort of talking about those guys because it's not interesting to your story. But do you see? Are there rock stars? You hear that, online rock stars. Do you see people now where you go, God, that person's going to fly? I can just see it. They've already got whatever you need to succeed in an online world. Or does it take you by surprise when somebody achieves more than maybe even they expected?
It's a good question. I can kind of see when when you come across a person, let's just talk about the online world here, and someone who really wants to get away from that corporate world and start, maybe they're doing something on the side while they have their day job and wants to move that into full time. You can kind of tell when people who are trying to do that, you can kind of tell that they're going to be successful. And, that it comes back to that word hustle that we talked about before. They're hustling, they are reaching out to people to make connections and not doing it in a way of how can you help me, but they're doing it in a way of how can I help you? And, just genuinely reaching out and trying to help other people, making those connections, doing their work for their own projects, whatever they might be working on, trying to help as many people as possible. And they're being seen, whether it's starting a podcast or on video, or they are guest blogging out there or at conferences. They're out there and they're hustling. And, it's those traits that when you see that, they become people to watch. Those are the people that are most likely going to be able to say a little while down the road, you know what? Yeah, heck yeah. I left my corporate job. I'm doing really well. I'm creating my own lifestyle of, in this business that is mine now, and I'm calling my own shots. So, I think you can definitely see that. I don't. For me personally, answering that question as far as do people sneak up on you, I don't think so, because you see those people who are out there, who are on video, who are starting their own podcasts, like I said before, who are out there in front of people who are creating their work and putting themselves out there. And again, it's that making those personal connections with people, whether it's at a conference or reaching out to them in social media and establishing a relationship with them. It's those people, I think, that have those traits, that are doing those things, that are doing it in a genuine way, who can look back in a little while and say, you know what, I'm doing the right things. I left my corporate job and this is what I'm doing now. And I'm super happy living the lifestyle that I want to be living.
I think that is a blueprint for success. You really have to hustle. You need to make connections, you need to provide value, and you've got to get out there. Those 4 things, really, if we stop the show now and just talk about how lovely it is in San Diego for the next 40 minutes, there's gold in those hills, Rick, isn't there? That is those 4 hills. For sure. And I think a key word there that I mentioned too is doing it in a genuine way. I can't tell you how many times, and not only for myself, but I hear it from other people as well. And when people are reaching out to them to try to establish a relationship with them, but they're approaching it from the wrong way of, hey, can you help me do X, Y, Z? Rather than saying, hey, I understand that you're working on this, or, I love what you did with this. Can I add value to that? Can I help you in some way? So yeah, those are sort of 4 pillars that if you can follow those things and do it in a genuine way, you're really setting yourself up for success. Now, if we jump right back in time, because when you was in corporate America and you decided to leap and have that leap of faith, was it something that was an epiphany and boom, you just went with it? Because I've been stalking you for a while, Mr. Mulready, and the thing that I have got a flavour of you is that you're quite spontaneous. When something it seems right to you, you take almost immediate action.
I go after it.
Yeah, you go after it big time.
I stalked my wife.
Well, I'm going to talk about that actually, because she's a beautiful woman, Amy Clover, and you're a handsome man as well. And
well, thank you.
So the two of you, because I've actually got a theory on this. And is this just in the United Kingdom or in America? But do you find that the best looking ladies normally have the ugliest blokes?
Well. Wait, what are you saying about me right now?
No, I already preempted that. I said you was a good-looking man. You see, you're not in that equation. But
that's funny.
But I think that's true. And my theory on this, and I'm going to say it now because this will help people create a dream life, is this: if you're not very good-looking as a guy, then you pretty much get knocked back by most people that you ask out for a date. Okay, that's just how it's fair. And if you are a top-notch, top-of-the-pile beauty woman, that the majority of men go, oh, she's out of my league. She's never going to say yes to me. So no one actually asks her out. So that's why the guy who gets knocked back all the time and is just always expecting a no, chances his arm because he's just used to the nose. She's waiting for it, and bang, the two connect. And so the sort of unattractive bloke, he is the one who's really going to succeed because he's trained himself to take action on a daily basis.
He has nothing to lose.
Yeah. Is that the most brilliant theory that you've ever heard in your life?
It's pretty mind-shattering, David. I like that, actually. I like it. I like it. I mean, it really comes down to, your mindset and your self-confidence in yourself and realizing that nobody is, quote unquote, out of your league. So yeah, it is funny though, because I'm one of those people, I hate to admit it, but when I see a couple out there and one of them is far more good looking than the other, and I can't believe I'm admitting that I do this, but hey, I'm human, I do it. I often will say, man, like I think about that situation. I think about like, how do they end up together? And I like, what is that person seeing the other person and vice versa? So I start thinking about that, but that's a very, very good theory that you have there.
You see, that's why you came on the show. You see?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we should develop our own podcast, Rick's Tricks with Chicks. What about that?
I love it.
That would be brilliant. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. So as we were saying, back in corporate land, you were there, and you decided to make that leap of faith because you see something and you go for it.
Yeah.
Many people, as I was saying in the introduction, would have gone, I'm doing very well for myself here. This is where I am. And I will stay there until retirement. And pretty much life is as good as it was. When you decided to make that jump, was there people saying to you, Rick, what the hell are you doing? You've got it made, mate. Or was there, were they bigging you up to go, Rick, go for it?
Yeah, I come from a very traditional background where, both of my parents were in their jobs for, several years. And just, I come from a very traditional family from that sense. So when I made that decision in my head, so sort of before I went off on that tangent about stalking my now wife, Amy, before I went off on that tangent, you said something about, did I forget exactly what you said about.
Was it an epiphany or was it just gradually creep up on you?
Yeah, exactly. It was sort of more gradual where I was realizing that I wasn't super happy in that job and in the jobs that I was doing in the corporate world. And when I say job, it's just meaning like I pretty much had the same type of job, but just different companies. So I was realizing that I wasn't very happy doing what I was doing, and I was making really good money. But I didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to leave my job and start my own thing. I didn't do that. It was sort of a process. It was just sort of something I started thinking about for a while. I am spontaneous, but in a sense of, and this might not make sense, but I also think about once I decide on something that I'm going to do something, I tend to So it might be a spontaneous thing that I decide to do it, but I don't necessarily jump right away. I'm pretty calculated in planning whatever I'm trying to do. So in this case, for me, it was a gradual thing. And then I finally said, you know what? I am going to leave. I'm going to come up with a plan to leave the corporate world. And when I did that, I didn't necessarily tell many people I was doing that. That because I come from that very, traditional background with my family, and I didn't feel like it was something that they would really understand, and I wasn't going to bring it up to them until I was further down the road, where I had things more firmly in place and a real plan of when I'm going to be leaving, and this is what my plan is, and this is what I'm going to be doing. And I also too, my friends at the time were also come from that traditional background in a sense of, they have their day job, and in the evening time they're out having dinner, at home watching TV, or out at the bar, or whatever it may be. And so it was that traditional background also. Obviously very, very different. I still have many of those friends, luckily, but I'm also, as we talked about before, surrounding myself now with people who are living the lifestyle that I do now. So I didn't necessarily at the time when I made the decision to leave corporate world to tell too many people, because, this was new. This was something that was, out of for the life that how I'd grown up in the world that I'd created for myself at the time. It wasn't something that was really normal. So I wanted to kind of keep it to myself until I had more of a firm plan in place to leave. And this is what I was going to do. And when I did tell people, yeah, I did get that you're doing what? Especially people who knew the type of job that I was in and knew how well it paid. They thought I was absolutely crazy. So those were interesting conversations. And some of those people I'm not friends with anymore, and the friends that I am still connected with, they supported me and still support me in what I'm doing. And my family doesn't quite understand. I mean, they understand it, but if you were to ask them what I do, they'll say, oh, he does something with Facebook ads and he has a podcast. That's about it.
It is a weird thing though, that, isn't it? That
the
close family who should know you inside out. My parents, they're in their 70s now. Mm-hmm. They have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. They just can't fathom it. And even if I've sat down with the sort of business plan and shown them, they just cannot see it. They've just kind of got a sort of mild trust that I'm not going to do anything really mad, and the family are going to be living in cardboard boxes and all that kind of stuff. And when you basically sacked a lot of the anchors to your old life, which is a key part of making the transition to a better world, isn't it? You've got to get rid of the people who aren't willing to take the action themselves and will ultimately kind of hold you back by putting those seeds of doubt into your mind. But, oh, no, that's not going to work. And why are you doing this? You've got this and you've got that. And it's a key thing. It's a key thread that runs through a lot of the conversations that I have, how people have had to separate themselves from the people that they thought at that time were their closest mates. Now they look back and they were actually the ones holding them in place.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard this sort of analogy, David, but my good friend Adam Baker, who started Man versus Debt, he told me this analogy one time a few years ago, and it's kind of stuck with me. He said, when you make this leap into, you're as an entrepreneur and you start your own thing and you're doing your thing, and it's very different from the sort of traditional quote unquote American dream, if you will, of having that corporate world and growing up and getting married and having kids and buying a house and so forth. When you go on that different path for your life, you're always going to feel like, or often, I don't want to say always, but you're oftentimes going to feel like crabs in a bucket. And if you were to watch crabs in a bucket, you see one or two crabs trying to get out of the bucket, but then the other crabs are pulling them back in. And this is the same sort of thing, because it's that comfort level. Whereas if people were, I was actually, when I was working out today, I was just listening to Internet Business Mastery, the podcast, and Jeremy and Jason were talking about this. They didn't mention the crab in the bucket analogy, but they were talking about this sort of topic here. When you decide to go on a life path that's different from most people, a lot of those people are going to try to bring you back in and try to bring you down and sort of bring you back into their world. And it's what you have to remember is it's not you, it's them. They might have the insecurity of, ooh, Rick is doing Rick or David is doing something that I want to be doing, but I don't have, I'm not able to do that. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah, I know exactly
I want to be
what you
doing
mean.
that, but I don't have a plan to do that, or I could never do that sort of thing. So that's the whole crabs in the bucket analogy, where they, as soon as the one starts to crawl out and do something on their own, the rest of them pull them back in. And that's a hard thing. I mean, it's that pressure from people that you feel are close to you. You have to really look at it and say, you know what? It's my happiness that I need to be most concerned with. And if those friends are your real true friends, they're going to understand and support you. And yeah, if they're not going to, well, you might need to, consider finding new friends.
I was writing down, we all suffer with crabs, but I don't think that's a good thing to actually write down on a bit of paper.
Probably not.
No. So,
probably not.
It's not good to say on the mic either, so I won't. I will keep that out. Right, okay. Well, this is part of the show that we are going to get back to your corporate land, because I'm fascinated with the kind of the iconic image of you just driving across America like Thelma and Louise, it almost seemed, with your suitcase, with your future in front and your past behind you, and not really knowing where it's going to happen. But I'm going to play the words of Steve Jobs, because I was playing around about this time, and I think it's really the key point to the show, and it's the bit that really shows the leap of faith that you made at that moment when you set off in your car across to LA.
Sure.
So this is the words of Steve Jobs.
Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever, because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference.
What do you think of those words, Mr. Mulready?
I'm getting all emotional here listening to that. I love that. And I'm thinking about it, in regard to my own situation. And, you referenced there driving cross country. Well, I left I was in Northern Virginia. I was in Washington, D.C. Before I left to come out here to the West Coast. And that was a hard thing to do, because I was at AOL for 5 years at the time, and I'd been through 7 layoffs. This is back in 2000, starting in 2000 to 2005. There were 7 layoffs during those years that I was there, and the 8th one finally got me. And that was my first, big shakeup in the corporate world, in the job life. Didn't really know what to do at that point. And my friends, who I love dearly, and they're some of my very best friends to this day, they are working for, in the government back in DC. So those types of jobs, those people, that sounds terrible. The people in government roles tend to stay in those roles for a long time. And it's more of that traditional type of 9-to-5 job that we've been talking about. Well, I was in that. I was seeing that. And I was also seeing that, even though that they weren't happy in different situations, they weren't going to be doing anything about it necessarily. And I'm not like that. So we're talking about before, as far as being spontaneous and making a decision, that is one thing where I will not, if I'm not happy with something, I'm going to change it. It might take me a little bit, but I'm going to I will make an immediate decision to change it. And even though if I'm not really sure how to do it. And so I was in that position where, I was looking back and sort of connecting the dots, talking about what Steve Jobs was saying, and connecting the dots up to that point of where I'd been in my life. And I knew at that point that there was something better for me. I felt like there was something inside of me saying, you're being held back right now. There's more to it that you can be doing in your life. Excuse me, not really sure what that is, but when I came out of college, I worked in the hockey world. I worked for an NHL team in Washington, D.C., the Washington Capitals. And then I did a complete 180 and went over to work for AOL. So those were the 2 worlds that I knew, and I wasn't really sure what was ahead of me. So I was only connecting the dots up until that point, but I knew I needed to make a change. And so looking back on it now, Boy, that was one of the scariest things I've ever done, because you mentioned it in the intro here, David, where I literally did pack up my car. I went back to New Hampshire which is where my family still is. I went back to my family's house for a few months before moving out here to LA, but it was literally a decision of, you know what? I've visited LA once. I've never lived on the West Coast. I'm an East Coast guy. I don't have a job. I don't have a place to live. I knew 2 people out here on the West Coast, and I'm gonna go for it. And I did, and that was that driving across country. Again, looking back and not being able to connect the dots going forward, because I had no idea what was ahead of me when I came out here. But I was
that
able
for so many people is madness, isn't it? So many people, our listeners, are in jobs that they're going daily, and they don't like it. And they get to the Friday and they go down the pub and they moan and groan, and then Saturday and Sunday pass and they're back in it. So for you to do what you're doing, many people just can't comprehend that. It's such a big decision. Yes, it's come down well for you, but are you saying that it would have always come down well because you're the kind of person that would make it turn out that way?
Yeah, it's exactly where I was going with that, is that if I were to, if I'm looking back now and looking at that person when I left, scared to death of, I remember literally the day leaving New Hampshire and driving across country. I was very close to not coming out here and staying, because I'd been home for a few months after leaving Virginia, and I became comfortable again. I was around my family, I was around my friends growing up, so it was very comfortable for me, and I enjoyed that. And here I was, having already decided to move out to the West Coast, but thinking, holy cow, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing now? Things are really good, things are comfortable. Why are you going to make this big leap of faith into a place that you have no idea what's going to happen? And if I look back on that now, I realize, and I've had a hard time over the years coming to, the point where I'm at now, realizing that whenever I have that worry, whenever I have that fear of doing something, number one, when you feel that, you're onto something good. So when you do have that fear, when you do have that worry, it's likely it's a good thing for you. And number two, when you have that feeling, or when I have that feeling, understanding and realizing almost exactly what you said, David, is that, you know what, I know enough, I've been successful in my life well enough to be able to figure out whatever comes in my path or whatever is presented to me. And, I feel like that is something that is still a journey for me. I still experience that on a daily basis, having to remind myself that. But if I were to look back at that person, almost another month here is 10 years ago when I left New Hampshire, it's that, what, things are going to work out because you are the type of person who you have what it takes in order to figure things out when you don't necessarily know what's coming. And, that's such an important, it is very, very scary, but it's such an important thing to, for your listeners, if you're thinking about doing something that scares the crap out of you, number one, realizing that's probably a good thing that you should be doing. And number two is that it's that mindset and confidence in yourself that you can, overcome that. It might not turn out exactly like when I came out here, things definitely did not turn out exactly what I had envisioned. But you know what? That's okay, because I'm super, super happy now, and things have turned out quite well.
So when Rick Mulready pulls open his shirt, do we see like a Superman, or are you just a human?
No.
And that's like the question that I want, because for people who are on the road to starting something, they never benchmark themselves against people who also haven't started or are just starting. We always look at the rock stars, don't we, or the Rick stars, as we're talking at the moment. And
you always look at the end event, if you will, and never the process leading up to it.
Yeah, why do you think as humans we do that? Because I'll tell you a little story. I decided that I was going to do this podcast, and I've told this story a couple of times before, but I quit my job to become a web developer. I suddenly had this epiphany, I can't do this anymore, and I just quit. Bang, that was it, and the end of my corporate life, and I just knew it. And then I thought, well, I'll be a web developer, and I was a web developer for 2 days until I thought, I'm going to do my head in if I'm doing this for the rest of my life. And I just happened to listen to Michael O'Neill on a Solopreneur Hour, and I listened to it, and I just thought, I could do this. I think I don't think I'm going to be very good at the beginning, but I think I'm going to get better at it, and I could do this. And I was terrified. So I sent him a little sort of speak pipe thing, little voicemail thing. And he played it on his show. So episode 8 of the Solopreneur Hour is the first time ever that I've been on air, so to speak.
Okay.
Although you're not on air, are you? You're sort of on whatever you are on the internet. Don't really understand it. I still say tuning in, and you don't do that either. And I then prepared, and I got like 40 interviews in the can. And even I got to that point, I was terrified to actually press launch. It was lunacy.
Yeah.
I'd done all the hard work. I'd done everything to prepare for a successful launch. But still, the night before, I was thinking, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. No one's going to listen. It's going to be rubbish. And what am I thinking of? And it's just human nature, because I wasn't benchmarking myself on somebody who hasn't done it before. I was looking at the finished articles, and we all do that.
Yep. It's so interesting, and it's so I was just having this conversation with my wife Amy the other day about comparing yourself to others with their situation. And it's so important to remember that you need to be comparing yourself to, well, number one, it's not good to compare yourself to others anyway. And I have a hard time doing that. But if you are going to, you have to compare yourself to someone in the same point of where, the other person needs to be at the same point of where you are. And so we were talking about the other successful people here in San Diego. Well, a lot of them, my very good friend Amy Porterfield, for example, we are both in the Facebook marketing space, and she's been doing it for a few years more than me. And she has an amazing business, And so I have to stop and think, okay, you know what? We are at different levels in our business, but yet I have to look at, okay, where I am right now and where she was at this, we have to look at the same, you have to look at this almost the same point in time, if you will. And it's a hard thing to do. And like I said before, it's not good. It's not really good to be comparing yourself to other people, but you really have to look at, what led up to that person. It's like looking at somebody who, we'll use a UK reference over there in England, David. We'll look at a soccer player, or you guys call it football.
We called it football.
Football.
Man's game.
You don't necessarily see all the hard work and the hours in the gym and on the pitch and so forth. You only see them on in the bright lights and the game day. You know what I mean? And you don't look at the process leading up to that. Well, for me personally, people don't necessarily see being $75,000 in debt and seeing me sitting in the car, figuring, like, gripping on that steering wheel, almost not leaving, the driveway in New Hampshire to come out here to this adventure that has been, the West Coast for me. Or, having these big job offers come along my way after I left the corporate world and be very tempted to go over that, but yet stick to my plan to, really create the lifestyle that I want. People don't see those types of things. They just see sort of that, where's the person now? And it's really important to look at, hey, what went through, what did that person go through? And oftentimes I'd be really surprised they're going through this, or they went through the same things, or still going through the same things that you have gone through or you are going through. And, very often they're very, very much just like you.
I think the key thing to all this is you're not interested, are you, on the process? You aim for something higher, and so you do look up higher and you see the people that are already doing it. It's like, watching a snail in a garden. If you look at the snail, it doesn't move at all. You walk away for 20 minutes and it's moved a foot along the line,
Yeah.
And it's that slow progress, which isn't the enjoyable thing. We like meteoric rises, and even if it is an overnight success, we really don't care that it took 6 years of playing clubs and pubs and working it all up before they suddenly get their first record, and then they're at number one and everything. We're aware of them. It's just human nature, and it's such a limiting belief. That's why I'm emphasizing it on this show now. It's something that people have got to stop, and they've just got to consider themselves as a snail. And if you make movement, then you are going to improve. You've got to, because it's just natural practice. And you make enough movement, you get somewhere.
Yeah, there's that book, The Compound Effect,
yes.
that talks about, doing the little things that lead up to or add up to, a big result. And it's exactly what you're saying, David, is taking those small steps, whether it's, if you're in the corporate world and realizing that you do want to start your own thing. And so maybe you get up an hour earlier in the evening or in the morning, or spending an hour or two in the evening rather than watching TV, where you're working on, your side hustle in order to get that going and moving that forward. And it might not seem like, oh, I only spent 30 minutes on today. Well, if you continuously do that, that stuff adds up. And then and then before you know it, you look back at this big body of work that you've created and say, oh, you know what? Because I was able to spend that time and, the little bits of time here and there, it all adds up. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're able to, really then create the lifestyle that you really want. And if it means leaving the corporate world, you can do that. But you're right, David. It's starting with those little things, and those little things that build up into a bigger result.
Do you think you are a lucky man, Rick? Because you've got the beautiful Amy Clover, and I'm not sure why her surname's not the same as yours, but hey, you could change it into like a Brangelina kind of thing, couldn't you? Powercar, Mullover, Mullover. That'd be brilliant.
I'll tell her that.
Bring your problems to us, and we will mull over them. How good is that?
I'm all ready to do that.
Yes. Anyway, do you think that it's actually easier for you because you have got somebody who's also got an entrepreneurial bent in your corner?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's easier in a sense of she understands. For me personally, she understands the long hours, and because she's doing it as well, and she understands that the type of work that I'm doing. Whereas, like I mentioned before, if I am with my family and I'm on the laptop, they don't necessarily understand what I'm doing. Whereas, because they might look at it and say, "Oh God, he's working so much." But again, going back to the whole conversation we had earlier, is that it doesn't seem like work to me. So it's okay. Now, with that said, we both work from home. We both have our own online businesses. So that can be challenging at times. She just left right before we started talking here today, and went to a coffee shop. And I'll actually go meet up with her later this afternoon. But it is a challenge, and it's also a blessing because she does understand the type of quote unquote world that I'm in, because she's in that world as well. But at the same time, we have a 1-bedroom apartment here in San Diego, and we're both we're not going to an office, so we're both doing our own thing here, and it's not a huge apartment, so we have to, we really have to communicate like, okay, we have, this call at this time, or this meeting at this time, or, whatever that may be, and just make sure that we're not continuously stepping over each other, trying to do our own work, and also be respectful of, each other's time, because one of us is not going to the office during the day. So there's pros and cons to it, but we definitely make it work. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
If we just take you back in time, because we're coming to the end of the show very shortly, one of the key points to the show is obviously joining up the dots. What would you say was your big dot that you really could go, yes, that's when my life started rocking and rolling? Because so many people generally will tell me a time when they were very unhappy, or things weren't going their way, or something forced them in the direction that they are now. And they look back and they go, actually, although I thought that was a pretty crappy time, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Did you have a time like that really you look back on and you go, well, it was awful, but thank God for that? Or have you been a blessed person and you've just pretty much, gone like a twig on the mighty stream of life?
I had a complete visual as you were saying that. It's hilarious. No. I think of two things as you were saying that, Dave. There are two things, and the first one is definitely when I decided to come out here to the West Coast, and that was a big decision, and that was a life-changing decision because a lot of people actually don't think I've ever talked about this on any show that I've been on, but one of the first things that happened to me shortly after I came out to the West Coast when I was in LA was what I met a girl and I was engaged to her. And that was shortly after, and it was not Amy. It was not my current wife. So I was previously engaged, and I felt at the time like, oh, okay, this makes sense now. I came out here to, to meet the girl that I'm going to marry. And I was also still in the corporate world up in LA. And, so at the time I thought, okay, this is why I came out here. And thankfully that didn't work out. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but I'm so grateful that it didn't. But that was a big thing. So that was one thing that I look back on that was definitely life-changing, that, making that decision. The other one, and it wasn't necessarily a good time, because I was out here in a place where I'd never spent any time. I didn't know anybody, had very little savings when I came out here. And I was also, trying to make things work for myself. So it was a very scary time, but I look back on it and also say, it's, one of the very best things that I've ever done in my life. The other point that I think about when you ask that question, David, is when I was at Funny or Die, which is one of Will Ferrell's online company. I spent a year there, and that was sort of when I decided, that was the thought process of leaving the corporate world started at that point. And that's when I started to say, okay, you know what? What kind of plan do I need to put in place in order for me to do that? And I wasn't very happy in the corporate world at that time. But at the same time, part of my mind was trying to figure out, okay, what does this plan look like? It was very important to me to be out of debt when I left the corporate world. So again, as I mentioned before, I was about $75,000 in debt. So that's a lot of money that I wanted to, I wanted to get out of debt before that. Or before leaving the corporate world. So I wanted to, make that decision. And when I did that, that was another turning point for me, where I decided to hire a coach, and Adam Baker, who I mentioned before, was my first online business coach. And that was a complete game changer for me. When I had that mindset shift, I said, okay, I'm going to hire a coach. I got to figure out what the heck this whole online thing is, put a plan in place for leaving the corporate world at some point within the next couple of years, and also be sort of miserable during the day when I was doing, the corporate world. So that was, two big points that I can point to.
I must admit, if I worked in a Will Ferrell company, I would leave as well. I hate his films with a passion.
Really?
Yeah. Elf.
He's one of the nicest guys, though.
He might well be, but I have to sit through Elf every Christmas, and honestly, it's the only time I really pray that I might spontaneously combust halfway through the show.
I don't know if we can talk anymore, David. This is a great movie. I try to watch it every year.
Mr. Rick Mulready, I think we've fallen out. I think it was going so well. It's going so well.
We are done with this interview.
Well, let's put you on. Just before you do go, let's send you back in time like another film traveller, Marty McFly. And let's send you back into time so you can have a one-on-one with your younger self. And if you did go back in time and you spotted a young Rick, what would you say to him? Would you ignore him, or would you put a fatherly arm round and give him some advice? So I'm going to play the music, and when it fades out, you're on the mic. This is the Sermon on the Mic. Ooh, ah, ooh,
here we go with the best bit of the show, the Sermon on the Mic, the Sermon on the Mic. Ooh, ah,
Well, David, the first thing I would do is I would pull up a chair with young Rick, and I would have a coffee in hand, and I would point to this coffee and say to young Rick, young Rick, you're going to like this stuff later in your life, but you hate it now, but you are going to really, really enjoy this later in life. It's going to be one of those things that when you are creating the lifestyle that you want, you really look forward to in the morning. But in order for you to get there, in order for you to get to that lifestyle, in order for you to create the lifestyle that you want to, you're going to have to remember a couple of things. Number one is you're going to have to remember that it's all about mindset. Creating the mindset, or creating a mindset of abundance and success and love in your mindset, from an everyday perspective, is something that's going to be very, very important for you to do. And number two, in addition to that mindset, you're going to have to remember that you are able to do whatever you put your mind to. That confidence in yourself is going to be an utmost characteristic that you're going to need to carry with you throughout your life. And when you focus on those two things, focus on that mindset, focus on that confidence in yourself, and also the third thing of surround yourself with people who are going to support you, who are going to be doing the things that are doing the things that you want to be doing. When you surround yourself with those people, that is when success for you will start to go to another level and take off. So remember those three things: mindset, confidence in yourself, and surrounding yourself with people who are supportive of you and doing things that you want to be doing.
Wise words indeed, and I hope the young Rick... and can I just say something to the young Rick, actually?
Of course, please.
When you see Elf on the telly at Christmas, kick the TV in. People will be unhappy, but they will thank you for the rest of their lives. You'll get in trouble, but just go with it, young Rick.
Love it.
How can people connect with you, Mr. Mulready?
My email list is the best way, rickmulready.com. Just hop on the email list there, and that is the best way to stay up to date with what's going on here at Rick Mulready headquarters. And you also mentioned the podcast too, Inside Social Media, and that's on iTunes and Stitcher and wherever you can find podcasts, that's there.
Well, we'll put all those on the show notes, and I have to say thank you so much for spending time with us today, joining up those dots of your life. You have been one of the nicest people we've had. You know, it's true at the beginning. No one can find anything bad to say about you, and I've tried to dig up the dirt. I just edit it in. I sort of make it sound like anything. Please come back again when you have more dots to join up, because I really do believe that the only way to build our futures is by connecting our pasts. Mr. Rick Mulready, thank you so much.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
David doesn't want you to become a faded version of the brilliant self you were once to become. So he's put together an amazing guide for you called the 8 Pieces of Advice that every successful entrepreneur practices, including the 2 that changed his life. Head over to joinupdots.com to download this amazing guide for free, and we'll see you tomorrow on Join Up Dots.